You wake up in the morning, and before even fully opening your eyes, you already feel that familiar weight in your chest, a strange sense of being out of place in your own world, as if you were a perpetual visitor in your own life. You look around, and everything seems familiar, yet at the same time profoundly strange. Your routines, your job, your social relationships, even your own beliefs seem to belong to someone else, like clothes that no longer fit, but that you keep wearing for lack of alternatives. You are not alone in this disconcerting experience. In fact, this sense of not belonging that millions of people silently experience every day may be the most promising sign of our evolution as a conscious species. What you interpret as a personal flaw or a character defect may in reality be the first symptom of a cognitive awakening that is transforming humanity in ways we do not yet fully understand. This existential unease you feel is not a disease to be cured, but rather the first indication that your consciousness is expanding beyond the limits traditionally imposed by society on human thought. For millennia, our species organized itself into tribes, clans, nations, and religious communities that offered clear and unquestionable identities. Our ancestors knew exactly who they were because their identities were determined by where they were born, the family they belonged to, the religion they inherited, and the occupation they held. A medieval peasant never questioned whether he belonged to his village or whether his faith was true. He simply was what the world around him determined him to be. This identity certainty provided a deep sense of belonging, but at the cost of drastically limiting the possibilities for self-discovery and individual growth. People lived and died within the same social circles, practicing the same traditions, never questioning whether they could be anything different from what they were born to be. Belonging was guaranteed, but it was also a golden cage that prevented the exploration of broader human potential. The scientific revolution and the Enlightenment began to shake these traditional identity structures, introducing the dangerous idea that perhaps the truths our community considers absolute may not be truths at all, but rather arbitrary cultural constructions. When Copernicus suggested that the Earth was not the center of the universe, he wasn't just proposing a new astronomical theory. He was implicitly questioning the authority of all institutions that claim to possess absolute truths about the nature of reality. If the church could be wrong about something as fundamental as the position of Earth in the cosmos, what else could it be wrong about? This question opened a Pandora's box that continues to expand to this day, freeing human minds from ancient certainties, but also depriving them of the psychological anchors that once provided emotional stability. The 20th century dramatically accelerated this process of dissolving traditional identities. Two devastating world wars showed that the nations for which millions died were in many cases relatively recent inventions of the human imagination. Globalization began mixing cultures that had remained isolated for millennia, revealing that what each society considered natural and universal was in fact merely one among thousands of cultural possibilities. The sexual revolution challenged millennia-old norms about relationships and family. Civil rights movements challenged social hierarchies that once seemed eternal. Each of these transformations freed groups of people from previous limitations, but also left many others feeling lost in a world where the old certainties no longer offered reliable guidance. Then came the digital age, and the process of identity dissolution entered a new phase of unprecedented intensity. Social media constantly exposes us to thousands of different ways of living, thinking, and expressing ourselves. A young person growing up today has instant access to virtually every philosophy, religion, lifestyle, and worldview humanity has ever developed. At the same time, the algorithms that governed our online experience create information bubbles that can make us feel completely disconnected from people living just a few miles away. We may feel closer to someone on the other side of the planet who shares our specific interests than to our own neighbors. This fragmentation of human experience into increasingly specialized niches means that the traditional sense of belonging to a broad geographic or cultural community is becoming increasingly rare. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of our era is the speed at which our own identities can change. Technologies that promise to know us better than we know ourselves analyze every click, every pause, every eye movement to create psychological profiles that are then used to influence our thoughts and behaviors in subtle but powerful ways. We discover that our preferences, tastes, and even our political opinions can be manipulated by sophisticated algorithms that know exactly which emotional triggers to use to make us act in certain ways. This realization can be deeply unsettling because it suggests that what we consider our authentic personality may, to a large extent, be the product of external forces we are not always aware of experiencing. Faced with the dissolution of traditional identities and the technological manipulation of our psyche, many people begin to question whether they have any authentic self at all, or if they are simply collections of temporary external influences. This existential questioning can generate a profound sense of not belonging, because belonging assumes having something stable to offer a community. If we don't know who we really are, how can we know where we belong? If our identities are in constant flux, how can we form lasting bonds with other people or places? This identity instability can be extremely distressing, but it can also be the first step toward a more authentic and conscious way of existing in the world. The great revelation that emerges from this crisis of belonging is that the feeling of being out of place may indicate not that something is wrong with us, but that something is very right. When you feel like you don't quite fit into any pre-established social category, it may mean that your consciousness is expanding beyond the limits those categories impose. The discomfort of not fully belonging to any particular tribe may be a sign that you are developing the ability to see humanity as a whole, transcending the artificial divisions that separate us from one another. This broader perspective, though initially disorienting, can eventually lead to a much deeper and more authentic sense of connection to something greater than any particular group. Modern neuroscience is beginning to reveal that our brains are much more plastic than we previously imagined. Our neural connections continue to form and reform throughout our lives, responding to the experiences we have and the thoughts we cultivate. This means that the feeling of having a fixed, immutable identity is largely an illusion created by our psychological need for stability. In reality, we are constantly becoming slightly different versions of ourselves, and this continuous change is not only normal, but necessary for psychological growth. When we recognize that change is our natural condition, the feeling of not belonging to fixed categories becomes less threatening and more exciting because it suggests we have much more control over who we become than traditional identities would have us believe. This identity fluidity also opens completely new possibilities for how we relate to one another. When we are not trapped in rigid social roles, we can interact with others in more authentic and creative ways. We can form communities based on shared interests, common values, and elective affinities, instead of simply accepting connections imposed on us by accidents of birth. This freedom to choose our affiliations can be initially disorienting because it requires us to take active responsibility for our social connections, but it can also lead to much more meaningful and satisfying relationships. Let me pause for a moment to ask you directly. When was the last time you truly felt at home somewhere or with a group of people? I don't mean that superficial sense of comfort, but that deep feeling that you were exactly where you were supposed to be, being exactly who you were meant to be. I know that many of us have spent years, perhaps decades, searching for that feeling of authentic belonging, trying out different groups, careers, relationships, always with the hope of finally finding our place in the world. But maybe the search itself is more valuable than any specific destination we might find. If this feeling of continuous searching resonates with you, share in the comments. I feel like I'm still searching for my place when, and complete it with your specific experience. Your honesty may help others realize they are not alone in this journey of self-discovery, and that the search for authentic belonging is one of the most universally human experiences of our time. The answer to the belonging crisis may not lie in finding the right group to join, but in cultivating a more conscious and intentional relationship with ourselves. When we develop a solid connection with our own inner experience, when we learn to observe our thoughts and feelings without judgment, when we become curious about our own reactions instead of being swept away by them, we begin to develop a sense of belonging that does not depend on external validation. This process of deep self-knowledge is not selfish or narcissistic, but rather the necessary foundation for authentic connections with others. Only when we know who we are can we offer something genuine to others. Meditation and other contemplative practices are becoming increasingly relevant precisely because they offer time-tested methods for developing this stable inner awareness. When we learn to observe the constant flow of our thoughts and emotions without fully identifying with them, we discover there is something within us that remains constant even when everything else is changing. This discovery can be profoundly liberating because it means we can maintain our psychological stability even in a world in constant transformation. We no longer need to depend on external identities to give us a sense of who we are. Paradoxically, when we stop desperately searching for a place to belong, we often discover that we can feel at home in far more places than we imagined. When our sense of identity no longer depends on fitting into specific categories, we can appreciate and contribute to a much wider variety of communities and relationships. We can be simultaneously a dedicated professional, a loving parent, a creative artist, a social activist, and a spiritual seeker without feeling that these different facets of our personality are in conflict with one another. This integration of multiple identities can be much richer and more satisfying than trying to compress ourselves into any single role. Technology, which has significantly contributed to our sense of dislocation, also offers powerful tools for reconnecting with ourselves and with each other in more conscious ways. Meditation apps can help us develop inner awareness. Online platforms can connect us with people who share our most specific interests, regardless of geographical distance. Virtual reality may eventually allow us to explore aspects of our personality that would be difficult to express in the physical world. The key is to use these technologies intentionally as tools for personal growth and authentic connection, instead of letting them use us for commercial purposes or superficial entertainment. Education also needs to be reimagined for this new era of fluid identities. Instead of simply transmitting information and training people for specific professional roles, education needs to teach the skills of self-knowledge, critical thinking, emotional intelligence, and adaptability that are necessary to navigate a constantly changing world. Young people need to learn not just what to think, but how to think. Not just how to fit into society, but how to consciously contribute to its evolution. This more holistic education can prepare people to live authentically and meaningfully, even when traditional social structures no longer offer clear guidance. Work is also undergoing transformations that reflect these broader identity shifts. The gig economy, remote work, and automation are dismantling the traditional idea of a linear career and lifelong employment. More and more people are building portfolios of professional activities that reflect their diverse interests and values, rather than simply following predetermined career paths. This flexibility can be initially frightening, especially for those who were raised to expect stability and predictability, but it also offers unprecedented opportunities to align our work with our deepest values and natural creativity. Romantic and family relationships are also being redefined by these identity transformations. As we become more aware of our own psychological complexities, we can develop more realistic and compassionate expectations of others. We can learn to love people for who they are, including their contradictions and their capacity for change, rather than trying to fit them into idealized versions that exist only in our imagination. This more mature approach to relationships can lead to deeper and more lasting connections, even in an era of accelerated change. Spirituality is re-emerging in new and more personalized forms as people seek meaning and transcendence outside of traditional organized religious structures. Instead of simply adopting ready-made belief systems, many are creating their own spiritual practices that blend elements from different traditions with modern insights from psychology and neuroscience. This more individualized spirituality may seem less cohesive than traditional religions, but it can also be more authentic because it emerges from each person's direct experience rather than being imposed from the outside. Art and creativity are becoming not just forms of entertainment, but essential tools for processing the complexity of our contemporary experience. When words fail to express the strangeness of living between worlds, between identities, between dissolved certainties and possibilities not yet crystallized, art offers alternative languages that can capture nuances of the human experience that rational discourse cannot address. Engaging creatively with our existential confusion can transform it into something beautiful and meaningful, even if it doesn't completely resolve our deepest questions. Politics is also being transformed by these identity shifts. Traditional categories of left and right, conservative and progressive, are becoming less relevant as people develop more nuanced perspectives that may incorporate elements from different political ideologies. Instead of simply picking a side and defending all its positions, many are learning to think more independently about specific issues, forming opinions based on evidence and personal values rather than partisan loyalty. This political evolution may eventually lead to more flexible and responsive systems of governance that can adapt to society's changing needs. The climate crisis and other global challenges are forcing humanity to recognize our fundamental interconnection regardless of our cultural or national differences when facing problems that affect the entire species. Traditional tribal identities become not only irrelevant, but potentially destructive. The feeling of not belonging to any specific tribe may actually prepare us better to face these global challenges, because it allows us to think in terms of humanity as a whole, rather than merely defending the interests of our particular group. This transformation of human consciousness is not happening uniformly or without resistance. Many people, understandably, are clinging to traditional identities even more strongly, seeking refuge in extreme nationalism, religious fundamentalism, or other forms of intensified tribalism. This polarization can make the world more dangerous in the short term, as different groups struggle to preserve their versions of reality against the forces of change. But in the long run, those who learn to consciously navigate this era of fluid identities may develop forms of wisdom and compassion that could eventually help heal these divisions. What we initially experience as a painful loss of belonging can, with time and conscious practice, become something far more valuable: the ability to find authentic connection wherever we are, to contribute meaningfully to any community we choose to support, to love and be loved, regardless of limiting social categories. This existential freedom requires more personal responsibility than traditional identities, because it forces us to consciously choose who we want to be and how we want to live. But it also offers possibilities for personal fulfillment and social contribution that were unthinkable when people were confined to roles determined by their background. The sense of not belonging that you may be experiencing is not a personal failure, but a symptom of being alive in an extraordinary moment of human history. For the first time in our evolution as a species, we have the opportunity to consciously choose who we become instead of simply accepting the identities that were assigned to us. This freedom can be disorienting and even terrifying, but it also represents an unprecedented expansion of human potential. The discomfort you feel from not fitting neatly into any pre-existing category may be the first sign that you are becoming something new, something that doesn't yet have a name, but that may represent the next stage of conscious evolution. If these reflections resonated with your own experience of seeking authenticity in a world that often feels superficial and fragmented, know that you are not alone in this journey. By subscribing to the channel, you'll connect with a growing community of people who are consciously navigating these existential transformations, seeking not just easy answers, but wiser ways of living amid uncertainty. Each week, we gather here to explore together the big questions that define our era and to develop the inner skills needed to thrive in a constantly changing world. This is not just an educational content channel, it's a space for honest dialogue about the deepest challenges of being human in the 21st century. Join us in this ongoing exploration of who we can become when we stop trying to fit into who we thought we were supposed to be.
I love to consider myself a storyteller. As an actor and a filmmaker, it's something that I think of as more than a job. I connect to it on maybe an existential level, on who I am. And one thing I often like to say even is that storytelling is a big part of what makes humans human. So as an expert on the history and the prehistory of what humans are, I'm curious to hear what you think of that statement. If I say storytelling is a big part of what makes humans human, would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Yes.
This is the this is the source of our power. We control the world because we can cooperate in much larger numbers than any other animal. And the secret of cooperation of humans is stories. I mean, you can't get to know more than 100 or 200 individuals, but the same story can be known to millions and even billions of people. And as long as everybody believes the same story, they can cooperate. They can agree on norms and values and so forth. The book is about the history of information. Nexus means connection, and information is connection. People often think about information as something related to truth, but most of the information in the world is not an attempt to tell the truth. It's not necessarily lies. If you think, for instance, about music, music is information, but music never tells the truth and never lies. There is a lot of bad music that people created over the years, but there is no fake music. It's just impossible to create fake music. What does music do? It connects people. It doesn't tell us the truth about something. It can make a lot of people in a club sway together to the sound of the same song. It can make a lot of soldiers march together in lockstep. It can make churchgoers to chant and to swing together. So this is what information does. It connects, and this is why the book is called Nexus, Connection.
Are you positive, are you optimistic, or are you pessimistic for our future? I know it's a hard question
I try to be a
answer,
realist. I mean, basically optimism is like saying, oh, everything will be okay. And pessimism, no, we are all doomed. Both these positions, they make us abdicate responsibility. If in the end everything will be okay, why bother? You don't need to take action. And it's the same if we are doomed, so why waste whatever little time we have on taking action? Realism is understanding that we have, as human beings, as a human species, we still have the resources, the technology, the wisdom to deal with major challenges, whether it's climate change or whether it's the rise of AI.